This presentation looks at the concept of liquidity and credit. As we've talked before, liquidity involves the business's capacity or the ability to meet current financial obligations. And as the definition there says, it involves the ability to generate cash to meet current cash demands as they occur, and to provide funds for responding to unanticipated events. So liquidity is a form of risk management. The basic purposes of liquidity is transactions. In other words, the ability to have sufficient cash available to meet the known cash demands arising from market transactions. This could be the ability to meet payroll, the ability to pay debts on time, the ability to purchase inputs. And so liquidity is there for transactions. The other two reasons to have liquidity are one is precautionary or safety. This is where we come back into risk management aspect of liquidity. So where you've got a source of money there that if you need it, you can access it, whether it be in a cash account, whether it be in an investment account, or whether it be in the form of credit reserve or insurance. It's there for safety when you need that ability to generate cash and generate the funds necessary to meet a financial obligation. Another reason for liquidity is for investment. In other words, to meet the demand of if you have an unanticipated investment opportunity, then you would have the ability to meet that. For instance, if you have some liquidity, working capital, and you have an opportunity to buy a piece of land, then you may have the ability then to make a down payment on that land. So you have the liquidity there to meet those requirements in order to take advantage of investment opportunities. Now, the sources of liquidity that we've talked about before is asset liquidity, which is our current assets. One of the measures that we looked at on the balance sheet is the working capital and the current ratio. Liquidity just being the differences between the current assets and the current liabilities. That's one way of generating liquidity, is having to be able to hold assets that are for resale. So the asset liquidity is one aspect of the availability of liquidity. Now, an asset is considered to be perfectly liquid if its sale generates equal cash or greater than the reduction in value of the business by the sale of the asset. In other words, assets become increasingly less liquid as their potential sale reduces the value of the firm by increasingly more than expected sales value. Cash, of course, is the most perfectly liquid asset that you have. But there's other, and inventories held for resale may be very liquid, provided that you can sell them in a timely manner. But other assets that you may have, depending upon the ability to sell that asset at its fair market value in a reasonable amount of time without undue transaction costs, can impact its liquidity. Now, the reasons for an asset sale value being less than its ability to contribute to the firm's economic value, there's three reasons here. One is transactions cost. In other words, what does it cost you to sell the asset? In other words, do you have to take it to market? Do you have to put it on the market and pay a commission to get it sold? These things that can impact the value of the asset or when you sell it in terms of what you get back from that asset. So transaction cost is one thing that contributes to how liquid an asset is. Another one is market imperfections. It's simply the fact that if you have to liquidate an asset immediately or in a very short period of time, the market may not be there for that asset. So you may have to take away some of the value in order to get the asset sold, which brings in, of course, the last one there, urgency of sale. The more urgent that you have to sell an asset, oftentimes the less you're going to have to take for that asset in order to get it sold, particularly fixed assets such as land, equipment, and things like that. So liquidity risk really involves the unanticipated variability of an asset's value over time. Uh, in general, the less variable an asset's market price is going to be, the greater its liquidity is going to be. You may have variations in asset values. For instance, for land, you may have variation in asset values for equipment, and you have variations for asset values of a product that's being held for resale. But the less variable that is, the more liquid it's going to be. The liquidation of current assets should not have a significant impact on the business. That's one of the reasons why we separate out current assets or assets that can be sold or are expected to be sold versus those that are more fixed, such as land and equipment and livestock. Now, we've talked some about credit reserves as a source of liquidity. In other words, it is the ability, that unused borrowing capacity that a business has that gives them the ability that if they need to generate cash in a timely manner, they can tap into their credit reserves or their ability to borrow. And as we've said here before, it's the difference between the maximum amount that you can potentially borrow and the amount that you've already borrowed on those assets. But a credit reserve is a source of liquidity, is that if you need to have cash fairly quickly, you can go and borrow the money. And so that credit reserve is an important source of liquidity. In general, credit is considered to be a highly efficient way to provide liquidity. When you use credit, it does not disturb the firm's basic asset structure, and the transaction costs are relatively low. In other words, getting a loan doesn't have a whole lot of expense involved in getting the loan, but of course then you have to pay interest on that loan. And it's true that credit is generally available. If you have the assets, then and those assets are can be used as collateral, you can generally borrow money against them.